and our mother and dad, Matt McMillen and Mary Ellen McMillen, were our parents. And I didn't know Jack very well for many, many years because I was 5 years old when he left home. And he went into the Air Force. And I have one really strong memory of that is where I was hanging on to a chain link fence like this and peering through it, and he was going off and getting into an airplane, and I was crying my eyes out, you know, when I was 5 years old. And so we visited over the years. We went to Windover, Utah when he was doing training for the FAA. Jack started out as an air traffic controller, and he had a very successful career working his way up to the FAA. For many, many years, he retired from that organization. He was very, very successful, self-made man, self-educated man, very, very smart. So when we first got to know each other is when we both ended up living in Scottsdale. And I was a teenager and Jack was working here. And we started to talk and get together and stuff, and I found that he and I had a lot in common. He and I were both readers. We were both very interested in science and all kinds of things about the world. So we became very close. And I was the lucky one of the family as well, outside of his immediate family of Jack and Jerry and Terry, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. This is kind of from my perspective. They moved, and then we ended up moving later, and we both ended up in Southern California, and for a significant period of time. And that's when we did a lot of family things together, lots of holidays and getting together, and Jack found his love of sailing. That was his passion. He and Sylvia bought boats, and we would go sailing and just have a marvelous time. When Sylvia retired, they stayed on boats and actually sailed up and down the California and Mexican coast and were yachters and lived on boats until Jack unfortunately had a stroke. Jack had a stroke when he was 56 years old?
93.
Yeah, 1993, and it was pretty massive. And it left one major deficit. He became aphasic. And that took a lot of courage for both Sylvia and Jack because he couldn't speak. And you could talk to him and he would understand everything you had to say, but he could not respond and have a conversation back with you, which is what he loved to do.
Unless he was cussing.
and so, but for us that knew him well, we could still get by and talk in our own special ways. And he'd draw pictures and maps, etc. And he also found Sylvia, and he found a way to stay on the ocean because they became commercial cruisers, and they stayed and they did so many cruises around the world. So he stayed on the water and he loved that. Sylvia and Jack had 2 children. Here's Terry, which is their daughter, and Jerry. Jerry passed away relatively young. He was 50 years old. And so we missed Jerry a lot. And after that, they decided they needed a change. So they moved to Texas, and they lived within 12 miles of us. So I was fortunate because I was near them again. Texas weather, if you know, is just terrible. And so they didn't like it. So they only stayed a couple of years, and they moved to, 7 years? What is this? 7 years? Oh my gosh, time flies. and they moved to Palm Springs in a desert climate and for a while. But Hugh and I, that was my husband Hugh, we were golfers and we would go out there to golf, and so still get to see them, so we were lucky. And then they moved to San Diego, and we didn't live with them in California at the time, but I was lucky enough again to see him for the last time just in March of 2020, just as COVID hit. In fact, I was on a trip and I had to leave early to go home because they were recommending everybody go home. But every time I saw Jack, we just had this connection, and I loved him dearly miss him. And so I would like, that was my perspective about Jack. I know other people know him and loved him. And so if anybody else has any stories about Jack.
Oh, I got a lot of stories.
that they want to talk about, please feel free right now. Let's remember all the positive things we can remember about Jack. So, Sally, tell us
I'd
about
like to
Jack.
hear them.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You did a good job with that.
Yeah, on the farm.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, he did a lot of favors for me.
Do you have a memory of Jack you'd like to share?
Yeah, I do. Actually, Ty and Marianne and Dyson and Nell came to California in 1953 from Phoenix, from here, to move to New York. And that was a chore.
I was 9.
Yeah, you were 9. It was, I'll never forget, Ty and I were sitting on the linoleum bathroom floor, and Ty was still picking up sticks, and Tyson came out and said, "You kids don't know it, but Santa Claus not coming to do what you do."
So is Jack there? What about Jack?
Jack was there on the floor with Ty. I got a blow my nose out.
Okay.
That was always a clown.
Well, she's doing
Yeah.
some personal hygiene here. Ty, you go ahead and tell us the story.
Oh, I
memory
got
about
so
Jack.
many. We'd be here all day, so I'll start off.
But try not to besmirch his memory.
Yeah, well, you know, I have an excuse because my memory is kind of to the left, but I still have some good thoughts. Jack and I go back before I can remember. Whenever I was born in 1941, 41, before the war started. And Jack and I, of course, he was 6 years older than I was. So as I grew up, it's one of the stories that my grandmother, every summer, my grandmother had a 250-acre farm. His father ran the farm. And so we would go visit, and Jack would be there visiting all the time also. So I was 6 years old, he was 12, and there was no air conditioning swamp coolers back then. But she just had got the outhouse where you had to go poop outside and take a shower outside, and finally got it inside. So when I was growing up, I didn't have to go outside and freeze to death in a cold shower. So Jack, we'd sleep out on the patio, and we had burlap. You'd roll the burlap down, you'd wet the burlap, and they gave you a couple of hours till you could get to sleep. Well, Jack was an excellent reader. He was an outstanding reader. So he would read me the funny papers, and he would act out the character of that cartoon character. Biggest kid. Now let's fast forward about 6 years. So 6 years go by, and we're at don't let me lose my thought here.
You're going.
I was 12, and he was now 18 or 19 in the Air Force. So he joined the Air Force, and so when he came back in whenever he came to the farm on vacation, and from leave from the Air Force, and he was driving a 1952 Chevy car.
Rod's convertible.
I remember that. So when he drove in on the farm, he said, "You want to go take a drive?" I'm 12 years old. I said, "Hell yeah, I want to take a drive." So back then everything was dirt roads. You had none of this. It was all dirt roads except for the main roads. So I got in this car and I'm driving. My dad had already taught me how to drive, so we're driving all over. We came back. Now you got to fast forward a little further. So now I'm finally an adult. I joined the Air Force. I get discharged out of the Air Force, and then we went over to Torrance. Sylvia and Jack were living in Torrance at the time before his stroke.
Las Vegas.
Yeah,
Las Vegas. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
excuse me, Las Vegas.
And I went with you.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm going to tell that story right now. So I'm out of the Air Force. Been out of the Air Force maybe 8 months. Jack calls me up and he says they have an opening here at McMillen International. He's an air traffic controller, in the tower, and he says they want you to send him a resume. I didn't know what a resume was. So we go down to the library with my mother, check out a book, read it, do a resume, which was basically the Air Force, a few odd jobs, and I sent that in to him. Well, a couple of weeks later, I don't hear from him. So Sally Ann was a flight attendant at that time with American Airlines, and she had some time off. So I said, why don't we drive down to Las Vegas and see Jack and Sylvia? Because I've never been to Las Vegas, she'd never been to Las Vegas. So we hop in my car. Now, while I'm driving down to Las Vegas, the guy that's wanting to interview me, he's calling me in Scottsdale, or no, in El Paso, Las Vegas, excuse me, I don't know where I live, in Las Vegas. So we hop in the car, so when we get down there, Jack says, this guy wants to interview me. So I called him up, went out to the airport, he interviewed me, he hired me. So now, to make it a little bit shorter, as the years went by, I kept going up until finally I'm an assistant director, about as high as you could get at the airport, besides being the director. And that was all due to Jack. If Jack hadn't called and got me that interview, I might have been a bum, I don't know. Good bum. So God bless Jack. He was my cousin and my best friend. And we spent many, many years doing, and he took me sailing when we were in Torrance that time. And he loved sailboats. So we went, after his stroke, we went over and visited with Hugh and you and Jack and Mary and I. And he had his stroke, and I couldn't communicate with him very well. But he drew a picture of a sailboat, and he wanted to go back sailing so bad. And so we communicated a little bit. And then, not too long after that, we were traveling in our motorhomes, and we went up through to see the Alamo. And so we San Antonio. So we called up, and Hugh and Jack drove to San Antonio, and we spent a day doing the Alamo, and then walking up and down the river walk, and we probably had a few cocktails.
And the other thing that they did is one of the main reasons they took that trip is to go down to Gulfway, Texas, and that's where the Hearns came from.
Where was
And
that?
so they went to all of the cemeteries looking for all of the Hearns. Yeah.
That's really cool. The only downside of this story is that now I'm the oldest cousin.
Okay, anyone else have something to say? Sylvia, would you like to say what? Terry, no? Anybody else have anything?
It's fine, let's just all enjoy being together.
Okay,
and enjoy
well,
everything.